Hello and welcome to the show. I'm Peter Whittle. Now, my guest this week, who's been on our show already a couple of years ago, manages to combine a career as a comedian with one as a financial expert. Dominic Frisby, you might know because he is a master in many different fields. Hello, Dominic.
Hi, Peter.
Good to see you. He also writes a column for Money Week. And in fact, he was talking on this show when he was on before, mostly about finance. But today he's here because it's a particular project of his, which I think you will find fascinating. First of all, Dominic, we're talking about an audio drama here, aren't we? I mean, I've never actually listened to one, but these are enormously popular, aren't they, on Spotify and on various different platforms?
I think so. I mean, the audio drama goes all the way back to Radio 4 and the old Radio 4 dramas, and they're still putting them out. This is even one step further. It's a musical audio drama.
Right. So has it ever been produced on stage, or?
Yes, this has a long history. This story. In fact, it began as a Radio 4 drama in the 1980s. And then it was produced as a stage musical. Yeah. And then during the lockdown, I took the story and turned it into a 10-part serialised podcast.
Oh, okay.
So it's 10 half-hour episodes.
Now, this is by your father, is that
My
right?
dad wrote it. It's his story. Terence Frisby, yeah. And we can talk about him.
Yeah.
But the subject of the story is, I think, a really important story in British history, and it's an untold story in British history. We know a bit about it, and I know the same thing happened to your parents, and we'll talk about that in a second, but it's how somewhere between 3 and 4 million children were taken from their parents and sent into the unknown. 3 to 4 million children. It was the largest movement of people in British history. Even bigger than immigration today.
This was the obviously the evacuees. What it happened? It started to happen before 1939, or was it 1940?
Well, it was in 1940-41. 1939-40.
Yeah.
There was one evacuation, and then everyone came back, and then there was the big one after Dunkirk, just before the Battle of Britain.
Yeah. So this is directly your father's experiences? Or
this is his story.
Yes, I see. So what is the name of this actually?
Okay, so the name of it is Kisses on a Postcard.
Right.
And why don't we start? Well, I'll tell you why it's called Kisses on a Postcard, and I'll start with a story. And so it's 1940. The last soldiers have just come back from Dunkirk. The Battle of Britain is about to begin, and they know that the Luftwaffe are going to bomb the British cities. And so the directive comes out from the British government that all children are to be evacuated. And those children under the age of 5, their mother could go with them. But over the age of 5, they were to be sent from their families. Nobody knew where they were going, how long they would be going for, and who would be taking them in.
Did they not know that when they started out on the journey then? I didn't realise that, you see. Oh.
And so you can imagine, I don't know if you have children, but I'm sure just like I do, and just putting your children on a train and sending them into the unknown and never knowing if you will see your children again.
Yeah.
Can you imagine that?
Yeah.
And so my grandmother decided to turn the whole thing into an adventure. And my father Terry was 7 and his brother Jack was 11. And she said, I'm going to give you a secret code, like the Secret Service. And the kids were very excited. And she gave them each a postcard. And the postcard had written on it, Dear Mum and Dad, arrived safe and well, love Jack and Terry. And on the postcard, they were to write 1 kiss if where they ended up was horrible.
Right.
And then Mum would come straight back and get them. They were to put 2 kisses if it was okay, and they were to put 3 kisses if it was nice. And that was the secret code. And they were to send that postcard home when they got to where they were going. And so she tied, they each had little labels on them with their name and their form and their school, and a little pack with a sandwich and a change of clothes, maybe a toothbrush. I don't even know if they had toothbrushes then. And she walked them down to the station, Deptford. My dad lived in Deptford at the time. I gather your parents lived in Peckham.
Peckham.
So just up the road.
Yep.
And on the way to the station, you know, everyone from the school, Deptford Creek Primary, was walking up to the station. And then you've got this scene on the station where all the mums put their kids on the train. And as I say, she never knew if she was going to see them again. You can imagine the wrench. And the instruction she gave them was they were to send her this postcard, and they were to stick together. Whatever happened, the 2 brothers were to stick together. So they got on this train, and they had their little secret code. Don't tell anyone. And the train goes from Deptford, and they'd redone the lines. They'd sort of rejigged the lines. And so the train it followed that line into Waterloo, and then it went out again, all the way through southwest London, all the way through Surrey, Wiltshire, Dorset, Somerset, Devon, and it ended up in Liskeard in Cornwall. It went all the way along that lovely line, the Dawlish, you know, the Dawlish coast, that beautiful bit of stretch of line.
Yep.
All the kids are going, the sea, the sea. And my dad and his brother, they both loved trains. My granddad worked on the railways. They were part of that generation who loved steam trains. But anyway, in Liskeard, some buses arrived, and their school was split up. And about 40 or 50 of them, my dad and some of his mates, were driven to this tiny village 5 or 6 miles from Liskeard called Dobwalls, right in the middle of nowhere in sort of East Cornwall. And they were herded into the village hall, and they were all made to stand in the village hall where all the locals stood round watching them. And in those days, accents were much stronger.
Oh, yes.
You know, you could tell somebody's, you know, even a village 10 miles up the road in Oxfordshire would have a different accent. And the Cornish accent was very strong. People still spoke the Cornish language. All the smells were different to, you know, you can imagine southeast London to a tiny village in Cornwall. Everything was different. And these strange locals were looking at them. And Dad described the next scene as like a cattle market. And the great expression that went across the country then was, "I'll take that one there."
Right, okay.
And they were literally chosen at random by these villagers, and their fate was sealed. And many people in that evacuation had horrible experiences. Some people had happy experiences. My dad called it his second childhood.
Really? Had they actually? What's interesting as well, people often don't realise, is that many of the kids would not have actually been out of London even, maybe. But do you know if that was the case with your dad?
They'd been to Brighton. They had
Right,
family in Brighton, they had family in Kent. So they'd sort of travelled around that thing, but they'd certainly never been as far as Cornwall.
No, you're talking another world, aren't you? Yeah.
And in those days, Cornwall, you know, England was another country to Cornwall.
Yes, yeah.
You know, the Cornish saw the English as foreigners.
Yeah.
And you can just imagine, for me, the wrench for the parents is the
Yes.
is
But
the
also
big thing.
the other way around. I seem to remember my father. You know, my father was young when he was evacuated, but his mother didn't go with him for some reason.
Was he below the age of 5?
I think he would have been over actually
Yeah.
5 years old. She didn't go, but he was still scarred by this experience, you know.
I don't see how you cannot have been.
Yeah, yeah.
To be suddenly taken away from your parents. And it happened to every child in a city in the UK. And the psychological impact of this, I don't think anyone's studied what the psychological impact was on that generation, but it lived with my father throughout his whole life. He would always talk about it.
Yes.
But anyway, the family that took him in was not a Cornish family. It was a Welsh woman who took him in. And she was married to a little Welshman who had been a soldier in World War One. And they were known as Auntie Rose and Uncle Jack. And he was, I think, 5'2", little Welsh prop forward. And he had been in a regiment in World War One called the Welsh Bantams.
Right.
And it was at the point, at first, you had to be over a certain height to get into the trenches, and then they picked anyone after they'd shot all the big people. And he was in the Battle of the Somme in a famous incident called the Mametz Wood Massacre, where the Welsh Bantams had come up against the Prussian Guard, who were all over 6 foot. So you can imagine these 6 foot, blonde Anglo-Saxon Germans all massacring these tiny Welshmen who were all massacring these Germans. And only 17 people survived this massacre. Oh, really? And he went back to Wales, one of 17 who just survived, and he was the only man who went back to his village. Wow. And they just said it got too much, the way every woman just looked at him. Why did you survive and nobody else?
Yes.
And so they'd left Wales and they'd come down to Cornwall. And he was now a plate layer on the railways. Very socialist, very pro-Ernest Bevin, that kind of socialist. Would have voted Brexit, I'm sure. Passionately anti-authoritarian. Atheist, but a big believer in, like, he had them every week. They went to church for the singing, mad about singing. But anyway, this was the family that took them in. They didn't know all of this at this point. So they're picked out at random, my dad and his brother, in the village hall. And they're walked back to this cottage where they lived. And it was about 2 miles from where they were picked up. And there was a row of cottages by the railway cottages, because he worked on the railway. At Double Boys Station, for those of you who know their Cornish stations. It's a sort of reasonably well-known station. And they went into the cottage, and this Welsh couple had their own son, who was 19, just about to join he was already in the army, but he was just about to go off and fight, by the name of Gwyn. And they went into this cottage. There was no electricity, just gas lights, no lavatory, just an outdoor privy like they had in those days, a cat asleep by the fire, a canary in a cage, a pig in the yard, some chickens, outside the railway. So that you had the main London to Penzance line, and so they could watch steam trains going past. Valleys to explore with streams to dam, a tor to climb. And my dad and his brother thought they had died and gone to heaven.
Really?
They just loved it. And so this first scene, I'm going to play you now.
Oh, great. Yep.
I say this is an audio drama, but we recorded the video of this one scene.
Right.
And they've just arrived at the cottage, and it's the first night, and the two boys are sat up in bed with candlelight, deciding how many kisses to put on their card.
Oh, I see. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. So here we go. Yeah. And we'll hit play here.
How many kisses?
I vote 3.
What would Mum and Dad think of it here?
Don't know.
No electricity. They wouldn't like that.
I don't care.
There's no bathroom.
I don't care.
Outside love, all they have. I can't go in an outside love.
I don't mind. I don't care.
What if it's freezing cold out there?
That's what the pot's for, don't you see?
I vote 1.
I vote 3.
Just one bed, got to share, all squashed up in it.
I don't care.
Kisses on a postcard we must write, something we've got to do tonight. Kisses on a postcard, what'll they show? Only Mum is going to know. What about Gwyn?
Gwyn's not bad, even though you can see he's mad.
Auntie Rose, what do you say?
She says weird things, but she's okay.
Kisses on a postcard, what'll we do?
I still say 3.
Well, I say 2. Kisses on a postcard, 3, 2, 1. Better be quick or it won't get done.
If we put less than 3, Mum and Dad will think it's rotten here. They'll be worried.
Yeah, well, there's the trains, they're good.
And the station right next to us.
That's terrific.
Hey, wait! I've just remembered. Hens!
What about hens?
Eggs, stupid. Real eggs. Not that horrible powdery stuff. Eggs for you, eggs for me, eggs for breakfast and tea. Poached or baked, scrambled or fried.
On board with soldiers on the side.
What do you say now? What's your score?
All right, 3.
I say 4.
You can't!
Why not?
Mum only said up to 3.
But don't you see? The more kisses we put, the more happy they're going to be.
Yeah, it's terrific here, really, isn't it? Like being on holiday, only there's no sea.
We don't have to stop at 4. Let's do hundreds.
Yeah! Kisses on a postcard, one by one. All round the edges, this is fun. Kisses on a postcard, squashed up tight. Telling Mum that we're all right.
Good night, children, everywhere. Your mommy thinks of you tonight. Lay your head upon your pillow. Don't be a kid or a weeping willow. Close your eyes and say a prayer, and surely you can find a kiss to spare.
Kisses on a postcard, kisses on a postcard.
You are far away, she's with you night and day.
This is fun.
Good night, children everywhere.
Telling Mum that we're all right.
Night, Jack.
Night, Terry.
Oh, it's wonderful. Oh, it's wonderful. But the thing is, they covered the card in kisses to reassure their parents, but also they did love it. That's right?
Yeah.
That's wonderful.
And he spent the whole of the war there.
Yeah. So
And-
you're talking 5 years then?
I think they went back in 1944.
Yeah.
When they, it was 4 years.
Yeah.
He'd got a place at Dartford Grammar,
Yeah.
which he would have started in the 11 plus. So he
Yes.
would have started that, I guess, at 11 or 12, and he left when he was 7. So 4 and a bit years.
Did they not? So it sounds to me. I mean, they obviously
The kids
loved
who hated it went home sooner.
They did, yes. But also, there was also some resistance to London kids, wasn't there, as well? You know, like, just a dislike of London and Londoners.
Over
Not
the
in
course
your
of the
production, but I mean generally.
Oh, there is in the production.
Oh, is there?
Very much. Over the course of the story, like what I described to you there was like the first kind of half hour, and you get the whole of the war and the whole of their story,
I see.
and everything that happens to Auntie Rose and Uncle Jack, and you learn Auntie Rose and Uncle Jack's story. But one of the things that Dad used to describe is the huge fights that would go on between the Evacuee kids and the village kids.
Yes.
And, you know, the Evacuee kids were just smarter, stronger. They even cheated better.
Right.
They were just, you know, Dad said we were the grey squirrels and they were the red squirrels. And the local kids, the Evacuees just thought the locals were stupid and thick, and the local kids resented these pushy newcomers. And he described a snowball fight. One winter they had a really snowy winter. I think it was the winter of 1942. And he describes this snowball fight in the village that just got totally out of hand.
Right.
And the whole village would fight.
Really?
And so, yeah, and the locals, I mean, some of the locals hated these newcomers, but others, maybe their kids had left home or they'd never been able to have kids or whatever, just found themselves with new families.
Yes.
And the whole demographic of the village changed. And that was the case across the whole country.
Across the whole country, yes, of course. I suppose it would have affected London the most, for obvious reasons. Biggest city, but also the one most under attack. This is a 10-part, right? So this
10
covers
10.5-hour episode.
excuse me, 10 part. So how can people watch it, or should I say listen to it?
Yeah, listen to it. Absolutely right. You just go into your podcast app, Apple Podcasts or Spotify or whatever, and type in Kisses on a Postcard, or you can go to kissesonapostcard.com and all the links are there on the website. And if you prefer, I'm also selling CDs on the website. To listen to the podcast is completely free, but the CDs you've got to pay for.
Well, quite.
'Cause I had to pay for them.
It's nice to hear that people are still using CDs, actually.
Well, people, like my dad was 88 and he was 7 when the evacuation happened, and he died in 2020. There are still some people in their 90s now who this happened to. And, you know, so a lot of people have bought CDs to give it to their grandma or to their granddad or whatever. And the messages I've had from people, it really, I mean, this is, Dad first and foremost was a writer of comedy, so there's lots of comedy in this, beautiful songs, but it's, you know, makes you cry, makes you laugh, like all good stories should.
In fact, your father, you know, wrote a famous long-running play in the West End and a film, actually, wasn't it, called A Girl in My Suit?
There's a Girl in My Suit.
There's
absolutely.
a Girl in My Suit. You know, this is you know, I'm sure that most people watching will know these titles, but, you know, this is a part of the kind of general culture that's sort of gradually disappearing, isn't it? I mean, before we talk about that, I mean, in this case, you're preserving, I mean, it was your father's work originally, wasn't it, writing this, I suppose? But aren't you sort of preserving as
It's
well?
like Peter, this has become my life mission. It's really weird. And this was originally written as a radio play in 1987. And so I would have been, you know, 18 years old or something. And it won the Radio Drama of the Year award. And it got more letters from listeners than any other drama in the history of Radio 4 at the time. And then it got optioned to be a film. And it spent the next 20 years in what's called development hell.
Oh, yeah.
And it just never, Ken Loach optioned it at one point, and it just never quite happened. And then Dad's friend, a guy called Jeremy James Taylor, golfing friend, who founded the National Youth Music Theatre, had been constantly saying, you should turn this into a stage musical.
Right.
And Dad had been going, no, it's going to be a film. Ken Loach is going to direct it, blah, blah, blah. And then, anyway, one time they were playing golf in the West Country, and the proprietor of the local theatre was in the golf clubhouse afterwards. And he said, have you two got a project for me? And Dad and Jeremy looked at each other and they said, well, as a matter of fact, we do. And they got another golfing friend of theirs, a man called Gordon Clyde, to write the music. And they put this musical on in the Theatre Royal Barnstaple in 2004. And I went to see it. And, you know, I grew up with the theatre. I've had it shoved down my throat since an early age. And most of the time, I think it's disappeared up its backside. There are exceptions. But I went to see this and I just fell in love. And I remember saying to Dad, I've never seen any show ever that's had that effect on a room. And the only problem was, it was in like one of the most remote parts of the country there is, Barnstaple.
Yes.
And so hardly anyone saw it, and it had a 4-day run. So it became my kind of mission to somehow make the money to put this thing on. And then that's why I ended up becoming a financial writer, because I was trying to figure out how to earn enough money. We needed £5 million to take it into the West End.
Yes.
Anyway, and it was revived again, and then the man who wrote the music, Gordon Clyde, died, and so only half the music was complete, and there was a load of things that needed happening. And then I actually kind of think it's almost my mission, but it's also there's some destiny that the Norns or whoever it is, the puppeteers in the sky are playing games with me. But so you know my Brexit song that I wrote, 17 million.
17 million F-offs.
And
we haven't. People get very concerned about us using bad language on.
We haven't sworn.
So,
we haven't sworn. And I've always been good at writing lyrics, but I'm not a good musician at all. And I used to have these ukulele lessons with this man, this very gentleman who wore tweed jackets to
Yeah,
the
yeah,
ukulele
yeah,
lessons,
yeah,
and I just knew, and he never talked about politics or anything like that, and I just knew that he was a Brexiteer and was sort of had a similar view of the world that you and I share. And so gradually I said, I've got this idea for this song, and he kind of helped me write this song. And then I said to him, I've got this idea of this song, and he actually wrote the music and put it to the folk song Uncle Tom Cobley and all the rest of it. And so we just forged this relationship where he would write the music and I would write the words. And then I said to him, look, I've got this project of my dad's, and half the music's complete, but the other half isn't complete. Would you be interested in helping me out? And he went, oh, well, as a matter of fact, my father was evacuated from East London to Cornwall as well.
Really?
And so we had these shared... So he came and wrote half the songs with me. And I just knew, after Dad died in 2020, if I didn't do it, nobody else would. And I didn't have the means to turn it into a film. I didn't have the means to turn it into a stage show. But I did have the means to turn it into this podcast. And so I did it to make sure that it exists.
Yes, yes.
Because otherwise it's just going to be a script in a CD and it will disappear in the vortex of history.
Exactly.
I mean, you said, you know, we think of the great... so much of our culture and history is just being lost. And I just wanted to preserve this because it, you know, I genuinely believe that if there were to be a West End show of it, or a film made of it, or even a series made of it, it could be as big as Oliver or The Sound of Music or one of those great musicals with kids. It's that special.
I was thinking of Oliver. I was thinking Lionel Bart was sort of going through my mind as well.
This is Oliver, but for Evacuees kids.
Yes, yes. I think it's yes.
There's a recurring theme to great stories with kids, by the way.
Yes.
And it's you see it with The Sound of Music, Oliver, Matilda, Annie, even Harry Potter. It's orphaned kids.
Yes.
Kids somehow separated from their parents or losing a parent or something. It's a really bizarre common theme, and this has that.
But I think the wider thing as well with evacuees, these stories are increasingly not known by people because they're not highlighted so much. I mean, I'm not saying there's any kind of insidious reason why necessarily, and maybe sometimes it is just a passage of time. But the fact is that they're not highlighted so much. And when they are, they have to be seen through a certain prism. You know, I mean, it's sort of rather shameful when I think my own parents, you know, were both evacuated, as I said, both from Peckham. They lived in streets, you know, like parallel streets, as people did in those days. You know, they got married, you know, but they were both. I think before they knew each other, obviously, they were both evacuated.
To where?
Well, to a number of different places, you see. So the chronology now will never be known.
Okay.
Because the thing is that when you're younger, I don't know whether you were like this with your father, but you're only so interested in them. And they, actually, when I think about it, they used to be remarkably reticent about. They didn't kind of overload, but it was there all the time. Their experiences during the war, but there all the time. Nothing was going to equal that in their lives, actually. You know, whether they were fighting or whether they were at home. But I do know that my father had a miserable time. My mother was with her mother, but you see that she was evacuated a number of times. Could that have happened? I suppose
I know
they must have gone backwards and forwards because they were a direct hit. I know that, but they were a direct hit. The story was this, I remember. Sorry if I may just...
It's all right.
They were in Peckham, and it was a daytime raid, I think, which is unusual. And the bomb fell in the garden, but it blasted the house, of course, and everything. And they were underneath rubble, and they were pulled out like people were.
God, can you imagine?
Yes, and then this was the heartbreaking thing. My grandmother was so badly lacerated, her blood and everything, that when they were going in the ambulance, apparently, my mum was saying she didn't recognise her own mother. She was called, "Where's mummy? Where's mummy?" She was sitting right there, because but she was badly injured. it left her, my grandmother, with an abiding hatred of the Germans throughout her whole entire life. But one little detail was that my mum managed to get, she had a favourite doll, which was a boy doll called Peter. And anyway, after that, they were evacuated, and it was Wales. And one of the reasons that her face healed up was that she used to bathe it in this rainwater that used to come in a gather in a tub outside this cottage where they were evacuated.
So in the valleys or something, just
Must have
very
been.
lovely.
But the thing is, I won't know any. That's what I remember those things so clearly, but I won't know the. Maybe they wouldn't now either, but the dates, etc.
I live in Brockley.
Oh, right.
Just up the road from Peckham. And one of the stories I've heard living in Brockley, and I would love to know if it's true, and maybe one of your viewers will know this, but one of the stories that does the rounds is that they sacrificed South East London. I mean, obviously, East London and South East London's going to get bombed first because
Yes.
it's closer.
Yep.
But they sacrificed South East London to save Central London. And they were able to confuse the German planes, so they thought they were bombing Central London when they were actually bombing South East London.
Really?
And it was one of those hard choices that were made.
I've never heard that before.
Yeah, I don't know. As I say, I'm not sure if it's true, but it's that's a story that does the rounds in Brockley. But you see, for example, if you compare, I don't know, Brockley or Lewisham or one of those areas, Camberwell, Stockwell, you compare those places to like Notting Hill and West London, and
Yes.
they took much bigger hits, and that's why.
Yes.
And all the council houses were built everywhere that houses were bombed. Council houses sprung up in their place.
And of course, that might be one of the reasons why, like northwest London was relatively untouched. I mean, it wasn't untouched, but comparatively speaking.
Yeah, further to go, high risk.
Yes.
You've got to get the whole way across London without being shot down.
It's fascinating. I mean, look, what it's brought forth, obviously, in me. I mean, we were discussing a bit before we started filming this. I was sort of talking about going back into one of those kind of YouTube vortexes you can go into, and into all these people. The fact that your father wrote "There's a Girl in My Soup." I was sort of thinking, these people, their names, and it's no disrespect to your father at all, they're sort of going more into the mists, aren't they, of history? And I just wonder, is it just a normal thing, or do you think that things move quicker now? Do you think people have forgotten quicker?
I think things do move very quickly, and there's only so much information that the human brain can carry. But, Dad said he learned his craft in the repertory theatres in the 1950s.
He was an actor too, wasn't he?
Started out as an actor, and he spent 10 years, a decade, doing weekly rep. So they'd be doing one play and rehearsing another. And they worked and worked and worked. But he just spent 10 years standing on a stage, doing play after play after play. And so he just learnt how, one week it would be an Agatha Christie, the next week it would be Shakespeare, the next week it would be something else. But he just learnt how the forms work, he learnt how the theatre works, how to hold himself on stage. He just learnt the craft of theatre. And we don't have that now.
No.
And you think of the great, there are lots of great impresario actors that we've heard of, Henry Irving and whoever else, Garrick. But, they were the great farceurs, as you say, Brian Ricks, people like that. Some people, maybe some of the stuff that he did was a little bit on the cheap side. Maybe it wasn't that highbrow, Ray Cooney as well, but they knew what they were doing. They were all great craftsmen. And what theatre do we have now? We've got the subsidised stuff, the National Theatre and so on, which has long since disappeared up its backside and is just doing woke-tastic stuff. And then you've got the jukebox musicals, and then you've got the sort of, by the jukebox musicals, I mean like the ABBA musical and so on.
Yeah.
And then you've got the revive, the Lion King and all the big budget Disney musicals and so on, and the Cameron Mackintosh stuff. But theatre itself, it's all but gone. And it was one of our great exports, one of our great products.
Yes. And
you wonder if it's still there, the energy's still there latent. But, You know, I was listening to a story about martial arts and the end of the samurai in Japan, and how the old samurai masters, with the end of the samurai, they desperately wanted to preserve their fighting techniques, and they were worried they'd all get lost. And that's kind of how judo was born. They all went and met and talked to this guy, and that's kind of how judo was born. But you just wonder how much craft has been lost.
Yes. I mean,
how much wisdom.
Yes. Was it natural, therefore, that you would kind of go into the business as well, like your father had?
Yeah, but I never, I trained as an actor, but I never had much success. And I mean, you know, I worked, which is more than many people can say, but I didn't like auditions. I didn't like the process of going and standing before somebody having them make a decision about you when I didn't have a great deal of respect for them.
Yes.
And that's why I always preferred stand-up, because you're much more in control.
You still do? You're going on tour, aren't you, quite soon?
I'm doing a tour of my unacceptable songs in the spring, yeah.
Oh, right, okay, so that's like a comedy with music, is it?
Yeah, comedy songs. I'll be doing my 17 million,
okay.
Can't say the word on show.
I know that's a revolutionary approach to podcasts, because people usually can swear. It's one of those things we're sort of, you know, we're lumbered with it now.
It's good.
Do you think?
We swear way too much. Like the guy who I write the songs with won't play on stage with me because he says I swear too much. And so I've actually tried to cut out the swearing, and it's fair enough. He's absolutely right. And I think you swear, I mean, there is very witty swearing.
Oh, yes.
But also it is a compensation for lack of expression.
Yeah. I mean, what about your own kids and Dominic? I mean, do they show any signs of being creative in this way? I mean, or performing or writing? Or?
Well, I have 4, and the eldest is not creative in that way. He did economics at university, and he's now got a job in recruitment. The next one is extremely creative, but more design, fashion, food, that kind of thing. She won't be a performer. The next one is a brilliant musician. She's the best. She's 19. She's reading music at Cambridge, and she's the best female clarinetist in the country under the age of whatever.
Really?
I mean, you know, she won. Oh. She was in the BBC New Musician of the Year award and stuff like that. She is super, super. And she's also got grade 8 violin, grade 8 piano. You know, she's just great.
What's her name? What should we?
Lola Frisbee Williams. And then my youngest, Ferdy, is the funniest of the 4 and could be the next great comedian, but I don't think he wants to be. He's only 17, so he's young, but he's got funny bones and he's got an instinct for comedy.
You do, you compare Comedy Unleashed, don't you? Which
When
is
They Have Me, yeah.
Yeah, which is quite a increasingly well-known comedy night, isn't it? Is it still weekly, I think?
I think it's monthly, once a month.
It's tough for comedians out there now, isn't it?
Yes and no. It's a saturated market, so it's difficult to earn a living and stand out. It's difficult to earn a living on the live circuit unless you're a name. If you're touring your own show,
woke, presumably.
Sorry?
Unless you're woke.
Well,
or do you think that's overplayed now?
No, it isn't. I mean, most of the guys who you see on a lot of Channel 4 and BBC stuff have a certain worldview. There are some guys, you know, the likes of Michael McIntyre and Mickey Flanagan and people who just keep their politics to themselves.
Yes.
And you know, they've done absolutely fine. But it's a difficult industry, but it always was a difficult industry. But the carrot of fame and glory and whatever is such that many people, you know, early in their careers, there are no guarantees, but the carrot of fame and wealth and all that is such that many people take the risk and give it a go. But there's only so much space on the top table.
Yes. Well, look, Dominic, it's been lovely to. I mean, this has been quite unusual for us doing this on the show, actually, talking about a purely creative production like this. I think it will really resonate.
Could I just add a couple of things about the show very quickly?
Yeah, please.
It's just like, as well as being an emotional story, it's also very educative because you get the whole of the story of World War II. Mm. And I'll just tell you about a couple of incidents in the show. For example, to give you an example, one is there was an incident where Plymouth got very badly bombed, and Dad was in Plymouth on a shopping trip when it happened.
Oh, right.
And they took shelter in a subway, and you get the whole story of that, and then the village's reaction to Plymouth, and then prior to D-Day, all the American soldiers came over and were billeted in various villages around the country. And the regiment of soldiers that were billeted in this village, and we tell the story in the show, was a regiment from Louisiana. And it was one of the few black regiments in World War II. And in fact, one of the local girls became pregnant by one of them, as many people did. And I just thought, and of course, in this little village in Cornwall, no one had ever seen Englishmen were foreigners, Americans were from Mars, but black Americans, I mean, from a different, I don't know, solar system almost. But, you got the whole story of that in there. And of course, from a musical point of view, they bring all their music with them and it's great. And I said to Dad, you made that up, didn't you? They weren't, and Dad was no, I had a tap dancing lesson on a sheet of plywood outside the barracks from a man from New Orleans. Really? And he tells, and I was going, no, but come on, you made it up. And then I went to New Orleans a couple of years ago, and I went to the, they've got a great military museum there. And so I did some research, and there were all sorts of regiments were billeted there, but there was this black, the Louisiana 14th or something they were called. I don't even remember.
Really?
But anyway, so they were billeted, and you get the whole of that story. And then Auntie Rose and Uncle Jack, their one son, was killed fighting in Sicily. Oh. And at the end of the story, when he dies, Dad and his brother said, okay, one of us will go home, back to Mum and Dad, and the other one of us is going to stay here and become your son. And that's fair.
Good Lord.
And they wrote this letter home, and they were going to do this. But in the end, Auntie Rose and Uncle Jack took in the girl who had become pregnant by one of the soldiers to save her from going to one of those homes for unmarried mothers. Yeah. They were the most incredible couple, giving. And they weren't given any money or anything, they just took her in. They were given money to take in the Evacuees, but not to take this girl in. And they were just the most selfless couple. And then a few years ago, they planted a tree in Dubwalls in memory of Dad. And we went down there, and I met this old lady who had been married to one of the local boys who had lived in the same cottages as Dad and had played with Dad. And she said that, yes, it was true. There was a big scandal because this girl had become pregnant by a black American soldier, and they had this mixed race kid, but it was true, and they brought him up. So it was true.
Good Lord.
Amazing.
Is any of that referred to in this?
It's all in the...
Oh, it's all
in the whole story's there.
So again, people should go to...
kissesonapostcard.com.
And it's either there free or on a CD if you prefer. Thank you very, very much, Dominic, for that.
Peter,
thank you
so
for sharing
much.
it very much. It was fascinating. Well, there you are. Some nice, well, not just nostalgia, actually. That's rather to cheapen it, I think. But I certainly found that absolutely fascinating and moving. See you next week anyway. Thank you. Bye. Hello. If you're enjoying the New Culture Forum channel and you believe in our mission, may I invite you to join our membership scheme at the link below or on our website, newcultureforum.org.uk. Our work is more important now than ever, and we have great plans ahead for the future, but we can't do it without your support. From as little as £3 per month, you can help ensure that we continue on our mission. As a member, you'll receive a range of benefits, including access to exclusive content, invitations to our private events, including here at our studios, free copies of our books, and much, much more, including, of course, our famous NCF mug. If you aren't able to become a member, then please help us by clicking this button and subscribing to our channel. It's completely free. Just remember to also click the bell icon so that you can get notifications when we post new videos. Thank you.